All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Let's open our Bibles to the book of Genesis. I think it was chapter 30. Let's go let this thing fire up. Yeah, it's Genesis chapter 30. So, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know exactly the context of it, but I was listening to the radio on my drive home, and they were talking about some guy, probably a sportsman. I think it was to do with the Olympics, and the guy said, whoever this person was, he said, well, he's not your average Joe, not your average Joe. And I told Andrew about not your average Joe, and we weren't sure whether that was an American saying, whether they would understand it. So I asked a few people at work if that was an American saying. They said it was, not your average Joe. You understand what that means, right? Not your average Joe. So from that led to thinking about Joseph, and so I thought I would give probably a bit of a Bible study thing about Joseph, and it's such a big story. This is probably going to be part one, because I don't think you can really do it all in one go. So anyhow, let's get into it. So Genesis chapter 30 and verse 1 says, when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I'll die. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in God's stead, who has withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, behold, my maid Bilhah, go in to her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. And she gave him Bilhah, her handmaid, to wife, and Jacob went to her, and Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. And the name of that son is Dan. She goes on to have other children, this Bilhah there. She had a second son, and that son was Naphtali, etc., etc. And so here is this handmaid having, bearing children for Jacob. But if you go down to verse 22, it says, and God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her and opened her womb, and she conceived and bare a son, and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So here's where Jacob gets born, and so he's obviously got a number of half brothers and sisters, no doubt, and he sort of is one of the youngest of the troop. He's, they're only half brothers kind of thing, and so he probably is sort of a little bit of an outsider, I guess, in the family compared to the other brothers, I guess. The name Joseph means he who adds, or he who gives the increase, is what the name Joseph means. And so, as it said there, she called him Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. So Joseph really means he who adds. It doesn't mean he's a mathematician. It means that he adds things, adds good things around him. And so Joseph obviously added to the family by being born, but what he was going to add in the future, the increase that he was going to give in the future to God's people, was so much more. There's probably nobody else written about more in the Old Testament really than Joseph. And as you read his story, probably most of you know that Jacob is really a type of Jesus. A lot of the things that happened to Joseph, you'll see a parallel type in the life of Jesus Christ there, as far as his mission and the things that happened to him and all that kind of thing. Think of Jesus Christ, who has added more, who has given more increase than Jesus. So there's sort of a likeness there, sort of right from the start. Now, if you go over to chapter 37, probably do a reasonable amount of reading because it's a bit in this story. In verse 1, it says, Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger in the land of Canaan. And these are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah, who we just read about before, and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colours. And so says here that, you know, Israel loved Joseph, his son. He loved his son. And we know that God said about Jesus, this is my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased. And so he makes him this coat of many colours. I think they've even done a Broadway play about this, about a Technicolor Dreamcoat or something like that. And so here's this coat of many colours. And so he was kind of favoured, I guess. And we'll sort of read that his brothers weren't all that impressed about. In verse 4, when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably. Unto him. And so here's this young lad. He's 17 years old, and you know, he's not the oldest. He's not the anything. He's just sort of one of the brood, as it were. And so the circumstances of his life wouldn't have led anybody really to think, hey, this guy's going to be this great giver, you know, this great man who's going to save a nation, save the world as it then was. And you sort of think about the circumstances of Jesus' early life, that purity in a little town, in an inn, and sort of nothing in the natural sense going for him at all. And I think there was a time where people were sort of talking about him and said, is this not the carpenter's son? Who is this guy? He is, kind of thing. And so very similar sorts of lowly upbringings there. And then he has these dreams. He starts having these dreams. He's a young man. He's only 17 years old. And verse 5 it says, and Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. And he said to them, hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheep arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheep stood around about and made obeisance to my sheep. And his brethren said to him, shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. And so the things that people said about Jesus, we will not have this man to rule over us or reign over us. These brothers said exactly the same thing. So his own said, shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou have dominion over us? And so they hated him. And the same thing happened with Jesus. His own, the Jewish people there, said exactly the same thing. We will not have this man to reign over us. Do you want to have dominion over us? And they hated him yet the more. And eventually, of course, Jesus Christ, we know, was crucified there. And in verse 9, he dreamed yet another dream and told it his brethren and said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee in the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the same. There's kind of always somebody, isn't there, that thinks, there's more to this. You know, his brethren just envied him. They were so caught up in sort of hating him and that he was loved more and all that kind of stuff, that they just didn't listen to what he was saying. But the father observed his saying. When you're talking to people, hopefully, that will listen. And I've heard lots of testimonies over the years of there's one famous one where there was a whole bunch of drug-addicted guys in a room, and a couple of recently spirit-filled young men went to that house and started preaching the word of God. And there was a young man who stood back and listened, and everybody else was sort of arguing and, you know, what's all this nonsense kind of thing. And he was just at the back. He observed the same, this young man in the back here. And eventually, that guy that observed the same, the Holy Spirit himself, and it's Pastor Steve Hartman, who is that person who stood way at the back of that room. And so there's always someone that's going to observe the same. And so verse 12, and his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them. And he said to him, here am I. And he said, go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with your brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, what do you seek? And he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. And the man said, they are departed hence, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren, and found them in Dothan. When they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to slay him. And so, even as he's just approaching them, they're thinking about what can they do to this young guy. And so the brothers conspired against him. In Matthew 27, we read that the people, the priests, I guess more accurately, it says that they took counsel against Jesus. And so they were trying to figure out, what can we do to this man, Jesus? Get rid of him, to get him out of our life, to get him off the scene, sort of thing. And here are Joseph's brothers doing exactly the same thing. In verse 19, they said one to another, behold, this dreamer cometh. And so they start mocking him. What happened to Jesus? People mocked him. Exactly the same sort of thing. Come now, therefore, let us slay him and cast him into some pit, and we will say, some evil beast has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams. And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands, to deliver him to his father again. And it came to pass, when Joseph was come unto his brethren, that they stripped Joseph of his coat of many colours that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty, and there was no water in it. And so there's Reuben here is sort of showing a form of godliness, isn't he? Or let's not kill him. Let's put him into this pit, and we'll figure out sort of what we're going to do. And people have that form of godliness in the world, don't they? Sort of this veneer of niceness, but underneath they were plotting. Underneath they were conspiring against him. It was interesting that what they did with Joseph here was that when he came there, they stripped him of his coat and then took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. And if you think of what happened to Jesus Christ, they stripped him of his garments, they killed him, and they put him into a tomb that had yet to be used, so a tomb that was empty. And so exactly the same type of parallel. It's not identical. Joseph is still alive, of course, but you see the parallels between the life of this man and the life of Jesus Christ. In verse 25, and they sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. And Judah said to his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him. For he is our brother and our flesh. And his brethren were content. And so they sold him in the next verse. And there passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. and they brought Joseph into Egypt. Jesus was sold for silver. Exactly the same as what happened to Joseph. He was sold for silver. And Jesus, of course, also was sold for silver. And Reuben returned to the pit, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. And he said to his brethren, said, the child is not, and I, whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat and killed a kid of the goats, and dipped the coat in the blood. And they set the coat of many colours, and they brought it to their father, and said, this have we found. Know now whether it be thy son's coat or no. And he knew it, and said, it is my son's coat. An evil beast has devoured him, and Joseph is without doubt rent in pieces. And so they covered up the truth by deception. They had done this thing, and so they covered up the truth, dipped the coat in the blood of the goat there, and showed it to the father. And this is what the world does. It tries to cover up truth with deception, with lies, with something that appears to be so. I guess if you're the father and you're brought this coat back by the boy's brothers, and it's got blood on it, and they found it, they say, this is what you would think. Something's got him and killed him. But it's not what the case was at all. And so they covered over the truth, which is what the world so often does. The truth that Jesus came to offer, to bring, this is what's happened to it, is that it's been covered over by deception. You don't have to do this. Oh, it's a secondary gift. All those kinds of things that we've heard many, many times before. And so we cover over things that seem very plausible. This seemed very plausible. I'm sure to the father, this was the absolute truth. This is what he would have believed, you know. And that's what happens in the world, that they see something and it's presented in such a way that it appears to be true. And yet, if you just sort of dig below the surface a little bit, you know that, of course, it's not true at all. Where should we go? Perhaps over to chapter 39 now. Chapter 39. And so he's sold to the Egyptians there, or the Ishmaelites actually, and they sell him. And verse 1 of chapter 39, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him of the hands of the Ishmaelites, which had brought him down thither. And the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. And Joseph found grace in his sight and served him, and he made him overseer of his house, and all that he had into his hand. And you often think about I wonder if Joseph felt that. It says here that the Lord was with him. I often wonder, how would he have actually felt? I mean, 1 minute, he's a happy-go-lucky 17-year-old going to find out how his brothers are doing, to bring word back of his brothers to the father, and the next minute, he's a slave in Egypt, in this man's house, Potiphar. So 1 minute, he's happy with his family and with his nice, bright coat. But now here he is, sold unto slavery. How would he have felt, sort of thing? It says that the master saw the Lord with him, and so there must have been something about this guy, something that was sort of an inner strength about him. He must have been the kind of guy that wasn't easily thwarted, I guess. He wasn't someone whose spirit could be broken easily. He must have been somebody that had a faith in the Lord, really, that perhaps you don't often see all the time. And here he is, and he's just in this situation. Yes, the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand, but he's still in slavery there. perhaps Joseph, maybe he sort of looked past his circumstances, the immediate surroundings, and said, here I am, I'm this servant, I'm in this place. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be the very best servant that I can be. And I'm not going to worry about the things that I see around me. I'm just going to be the very best servant that I can be for this man. Here's my circumstance. I'm going to be the very best. It says there that, everything that Joseph put his hand to prospered. And in the book of Isaiah 53, which is the famous chapter about Jesus, it says that the pleasure of the Lord will prosper in his hand, talking about Jesus Christ. And so as the Lord made everything that Joseph did to prosper, of course, everything that Jesus did was made to prosper. Even though it looked terrible for Jesus, of course, he was eventually crucified. That, of course, wasn't the end of it. Even in that circumstance, prosperity came from that. And here he is here, and there's prosperity being found. And of course, he makes him overseer of his entire house there. It says that the blessing of the Lord was upon all that he had in the house and in the field. The Lord blessed Potiphar's house for Joseph's sake. And so I've heard it said many times, that if you work for a business, if you work for a company, whatever it is, that very often you can see that company is blessed because there's a saint working there, a spiritual person working there, and for the sake of of that person, the business is blessed, kind of thing. I've heard people say that in their testimonies before. In verse 6 it says, and he left all that he had in Joseph's hand, and he knew not aught he had save the bread which he did eat. And Joseph was a goodly person and well favoured. So he was a young man of integrity, of honesty, and yet, even through all of that, temptation found him. He didn't go looking for it, but it found him. And the next verse, it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast her eyes upon Joseph, and she said, lie with me. But he refused and said to his master's wife, behold, my master does not know what is with me in the house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is none greater in this house than I, neither has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? What a fantastic answer that this young man gives, and he displays the characteristics that I just mentioned: integrity, all of those things. But even if you've got those qualities, even if you've got the Holy Spirit, in fact, that doesn't disqualify you from temptations happening to you. Whether it's this kind of temptation, it could be anything. It could be the temptation of getting a good job that requires you to work every Sunday. That could be a temptation that you were given. Hey, we'll give you a $100,000 job, but you've got to work every Sunday forever. So what do? Well, we know what we should do, which is turn down the job. Get them to give you something else. If they want you that badly, I'm sure they'll figure something else out. But so any quality that we may have doesn't disqualify us from situations like this. It's what happens next that is the thing that we have to bear in mind. What are we going to do next? Of course, he refuses and gives this great answer, and she persists. Potiphar's wife just goes to him. It came to pass as she spoke to Joseph day by day. She was just relentless, this particular lady there. And he hearkened not unto her to what she said. In verse 11, it came to pass about this time that Joseph went into the house to do his business, and there was none of the men of the house there within. And she caught him by his garment, saying, lie with me. And he left his garment in her hand and fled and got him out. And it came to pass when she saw that he left his garment in her hand and was fled forth, that she called unto the men of the house and spoke to them, saying, see, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to mock us. He came in unto me to lie with me, and I cried with a loud voice. And it came to pass when he heard that I lifted up my voice and cried, that he left his garment with me and fled and got him out. And she laid up his garment by her, came home. And she spoke unto him according to these words, saying, the Hebrew servant which you brought to us, it's all your fault, Potiphar, came into me to mock me. It came to pass, I lifted up my voice and cried, they left his garment with me and fled out. It came to pass, but his master heard the words of his wife, and she spoke to him, saying, after this manner did thy servant to me, that his wrath was kindled. And Joseph's master took him and put him into the prison, a place where the king's prisoners were bound, but he was there in prison. And so, how would he feel at this point? I mean, he's done supposedly everything right, and yet ends up in a prison. And you think about Jesus. So this man here, Joseph, falsely accused, trying to do the right thing. The Bible says in the New Testament, flee fornication. And he was fleeing. He ran out. It says that he ran out. Did everything right, and yet ends up in prison. Despite doing all those good things, he ends up in this place. So he was falsely accused, and he pays a price, which is to be put into this prison. Was it unfair? Absolutely. Did he deserve it? No. Yet this is the circumstance that he found himself in. And you liken that to Jesus Christ. Who more has been falsely accused than him? And having been falsely accused, who more paid a greater price than what he ultimately did in being crucified on the cross of Calvary there? In Matthew 5 it says, blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. And it can happen, it does happen. In chapter 26 of Matthew, it says, now the chief priests and the elders and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death. They looked for things that they could find about him where they could accuse him and bring in false witnesses and probably bribe them and all this kind of thing. And in Hebrews chapter 4, it says, Jesus was tempted in all things, yet without sin. Jesus was tempted in everything, like as we are, yet he was without sin. So Joseph, like Jesus, knows all about false accusation. If they couldn't find something that was against him, well, they'll make it up. They'll find somebody that will attest to the thing that was made up there. So where did we get to? Okay, so he's in prison there. In verse 22, and the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners that were in the prison. So now he's sort of not quite running the prison, but he's being favoured again. And whatsoever they did there, he was the doer of it. The keeper of the prison looked not to anything that was under his hand, because the Lord was with him, and that which he did, the Lord made it to prosper. Maybe he thought about the same things again. All this prospering thing. Where's all this prospering that everybody's talking about, sort of thing? Here I am. 1 minute I'm with my father. I've got my lovely coat, and my brothers turn against me and take the coat away from me, and I get sold to the Ishmaelites, and then to the Egyptians, and then eventually, the Lord's prospering me, and so I'm in this house, and I'm running this household basically. Sort of I guess he was the chief house administrator type thing, but still a slave, and then doing the right thing and going about his business, and next minute falsely accused, and he's in prison. And I guess the prisons of this day wasn't sort of quite as nice as the prisons of our day. Now, chapter 40, it says, it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended the Lord the king of Egypt. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers and against the chief of the bakers. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. So here's Joseph condemned in this prison with two criminals. And you think about Jesus Christ when he was crucified, Who was he crucified with? He was crucified with two criminals, either side of him. And so he's in there with these guys. It's interesting in verse 4, it says that Joseph served them. So he was gives the impression that he was sort of a bit of a slave unto other criminals there. And so they were there for a while. In verse 5 it says, and they dreamed a dream, both of them. Each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in prison. So kind of here we go again. This dream thing happens to him again. This time it's not him with a dream, it's him interpreting the dreams of others. And in verse 8, just for the time, and they said to him, we have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said to them, do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me then, I pray you. The chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, in my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. So you get this confusing dream, as dreams tend to be. And Joseph said to him, this is the interpretation of it, the 3 branches of 3 days, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand after the former manner when thou wast his butler. And so what he's basically saying is in 3 days, it's all going to be good. You're going to be released, and you're going to be put back into the same position that you were before, which was butler to the Pharaoh. But he says, when this good thing happens to you, if you could just put in a good word for me, that would be very nice. Put in a good word for me. But think on me when it shall be well with you, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. And so just think well on me. If you could let Pharaoh know that I'm here, and if you could, release me out of this place. I didn't do anything wrong, and yet here I find myself. Saw that the interpretation was good. He said to Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. And so he talks about the dream that the baker has, and basically he says, in 3 days, Pharaoh will lift up thy head off from thee. And so he's going to be executed there within 3 days. In verse 20, and it came to pass the 3rd day, which the Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast to his servants. And he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants, and he restored the chief butler to his butlership, and gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. Baker, as Joseph had interpreted, yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgot him. And so here he is, despite all that he did for them. Remember, he even served them in the prison, and they have these. He had this dream, and he gives the interpretation exactly what happened. You think he'd be really excited. Hey, this guy, you should have heard this guy. No, he gets out of the prison there and completely forgets him. And so again, you think, how would he feel? Perhaps abandoned, maybe like a nobody, but he hates me, think I'll go and eat worms, sort of thing, And so it ends up that he stays in this prison for two more years. He's in this prison for another 2 years there. In Matthew 26 it says, and he, Jesus that is, comes to his disciples and finds them asleep, and says unto Peter, what, could you not watch with me? And so you think of the time when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he goes away to pray, and he says, hey, stay here and pray, sort of thing. He comes back, and they've nodded off. They're asleep, Jesus probably felt as alone as anybody could feel in this time leading up to the crucifixion. And obviously there was nothing anybody could do. This is all part of God's plan. But, interesting what Julie was saying in her testimony about, Jesus praying. He still had the flesh. He still had to overcome things. Even Jesus was, hey, Lord, is there any way out of this? Let's figure it out kind of thing, but not my will, your will be done. But he was so alone at that time, as Joseph must have felt so alone. He's in this prison. He's done nothing wrong. And there he is. So what kind of prisoner is he? Well, he's decided that he's going to be the best prisoner he could be. As he decided before, to be the best servant he could be. The prison warden obviously saw there was something in him, as Potiphar saw that there was something in him. Something special about his testimony, that it would shine out despite the circumstances of his life. Maybe he was thinking about his own dreams and thought, hey, I had these dreams and they seemed pretty good at the time, that all these other sheaves are bowing down to me, and then the sun and the moon and the stars, they're bowing down to me. This sounds pretty good, maybe something really good is going to happen here. It must have seemed so long ago, that these dreams that he had about what was going to happen, they must have seemed so distant. Maybe he thought he'd dreamed them. I don't know. But it seems that as you read the story of this man, nothing will deter him. Nothing will turn him around. Nothing will make him drop his bundle. Nothing. He just takes each circumstance as it happens and makes it as good as it can be, and the Lord prospers him, and the Lord is with him. Christ had, to go through the things even leading up to the crucifixion, the scourging, the crown of thorns on his head, all of those things, the carrying of the cross through the streets, the big heavy block of wood when he was very weak, and all that kind of stuff. Even though he had to go through those things, nothing would deter him from what was before him. Nothing would turn him around. People often have dreams in their life, and quite often it happens when you're younger. Have this dream, As a young boy, I had a dream, and the dream was that I would play for Australia. Turned out it didn't happen, surprisingly enough. Actually, I didn't actually just want to play. I wanted to be captain. I wanted to be the captain of the cricket team, the Australian cricket team. Turned out that that didn't occur. But people have dreams, don't we, in our life? Things that we want to do, things we want to achieve, things we want to be involved in. And perhaps as you go through life, you see them not coming to fruition. That dream didn't happen. I didn't get that job, and I didn't marry that person, and I didn't do this, and I didn't do that, and I didn't do this other thing. But people that see dreams to fruition are people that don't give up on them. People whose dreams come true in that sense, ambition type dreams. They see them to fruition because they don't give up. They're not deterred. They won't change. They just keep going. It doesn't even appear as though he's striving for these things. He's just, as each circumstance comes up to him, he takes it on board. Christ did. As things happened to him, he took them in his stride. And he took them all the way to the cross of Calvary there. Maybe he recognized at this point even that there was a plan and a purpose that God had for him. Now we know, if you've read this whole story, we know the plan, we know the purpose, we know all about it. We know what's going to happen, but he had no clue at this point. And yet, he realized that all of this stuff is for a purpose. Maybe God was strengthening him for a time to come. revealing things to him, maybe about himself, maybe about his very character. Maybe he was stealing his character. Double E, not E-A. Stealing his character. Forging his character for what was to come. And so, probably won't go much further there. There's many things about this man that are parallels between the life of Jesus. If you look it up, there's just whole lists of them about the things that are types of Jesus in this particular man. And so here he is, that he's alone, and he's left, and he's forgotten, and yet we see what happens in the future, that he's blessed. The other interesting thing about this man, Joseph, if you think about Jesus Christ, there were two significant people in his life that were there at his birth and that were there at his death. Both of them were called Joseph. Both of them. Joseph was his earthly father, and when he was buried, it was Joseph of Arimathea that was involved in the taking of the body there. And so I found that very interesting, that you look at Jesus Christ, and from his beginning, natural beginning, to his natural end, the two people that bookend that in his life are both called Joseph. He who adds, he who gives increase. And so I thought that was interesting. So that was kind of part one of, I don't know how many parts, it might be two, it might be three, I don't really know. So kind of run out of time there, but that was just a bit of a study about this particular man. And at some point in the future, when I write it, we'll have part two. So all the people said, amen. All right, praise the Lord. We will have communion now. If somebody could turn that off, Angela, if you could turn that off, darling.